2. Well, now are we recording yet? Now we're recording. Episode 168 with my buddy Dominic Milton Trott. So for everyone listening, I don't like the idea of a Patreon where people just ask for money. So I uploaded a bunch of my Photoshop and original artwork to a website where you can buy it, and the profits will go to the podcast. So if you're listening to the podcast, if you want to support the podcast and also buy some cool-ass artwork, that link will be in the top comment. But enough of that. Dominic Milton Trott, my buddy, author of The Drug User's Bible. Getting into it today.
Okay.
Introduce yourself for all the new listeners.
All the new listeners. I'm the author of that tome on 522 pages of The Drug User's Bible, and I self-administered 157 psychoactive chemicals and plants so that I could write about them with honesty, integrity, and hopefully accuracy.
It's a goddamn madman. And today we're going into, speaking of drugs, I'm going to take some ibuprofen for my back. And
oh no,
well, I turned 30 2 weeks ago, Dominic, and now I'm officially old. And because the day after my 30th birthday,
I must be dead then, because I'm twice as old as you.
How old are you?
How old do you actually think I am?
How old do I think you are?
Yeah, I'm not. Don't take anything.
Yeah, well, my parents are 62.
Mm-hmm. Am I younger than your parents or older?
I say you're 60 on the nose.
You're not far off. I don't like to say because I've got my.
You don't have to. I think you're beautiful regardless, Dominic. I love you.
Yeah, I mean, time isn't linear anyway, so does it?
Yeah, what does it matter, man? What does it matter? I'm 30. I could be dead for all I know. The day after my 30th birthday, I was at work and I bent over and I picked up a cardboard box that weighed a whopping 1 pound, and I threw out my back. Because for the last 2 weeks, I've been hobbling around.
Sound good.
I'm like, this is it. It's time to put down the racehorse. So yeah, now I'm taking NSAIDs to reduce inflammation.
Okay.
But on that note, we're going to talk about how you classified the drugs, and that is something I had legitimately been interested in and curious about. Was, I look at it from my limited knowledge, and I look at it from probably most people my age, or really not even my age, anyone who's got a limited knowledge. They've drank before, they've smoked cigarettes, they've smoked pot, maybe they've taken psychedelics on a couple occasions, maybe they've used a Xanax when they're having anxiety on a plane. But aside from that, I feel like I'm pretty average, below average in terms of variety of drug uses. And so leading from that, I think that I can only speak for myself, but I imagine most people look at it as it's like, you got your alcohol, you kind of put weed, and maybe you think psychedelics is just like a little more intense of a weed. And then you kind of just, in my mind, you categorize everything else as like hard drugs. It's like meth, heroin, PCP, the stuff you see on the evening news. Don't take this, you're going to jump out of your window. But there is a much larger and more distinct and scientific categorization of these, and that's what you're going to go into before I so rudely cut you off.
Yeah,
so shut up.
I thought how to I took 157 drugs and all different types of drugs. Yeah. And when I first started doing this and recording it and documenting it, obviously the first question is, how do I organise the book?
Sure.
Because for new people, I've written the harm reduction information for each drug and the doses and what the experience is like and so on. Because how do you organise something? You can't just alphabetical order of drugs, and that is not a good way, because they share certain properties which cross certain numbers of drugs, and you can organise them.
Beer
is a psychedelic. So I thought, okay, well, I'll categorise them by effect, so that you have psychedelics and people, and I define what the actual classifications are. What is a psychedelic? That's in the book. But so I thought, well, okay, well, psychedelics, obvious classification, if you like, and in there would go LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, 2CBs, and so forth. All the drugs that have that hallucinogenic type effect or psychedelics. But where from there? I mean, it's not immediately obvious to Joe Public. And I thought, well, okay, well, I've got to do this somehow that is sensible, logical, and people will find their way around the book and understand more about drugs via the organisation of the classifications. So I'll go through the different classifications I used and why I put certain drugs under those classifications. Because some drugs, like alcohol,
sure,
initially it's a bit of a stimulant. You get it's an upper, and then it's no longer a stimulant, it's a downer, and you're sedated. So is it a stimulant or is it a depressant?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's decisions to be made with some of these drugs. Although most of the drugs, it's pretty damned obvious what they're doing to you, and therefore what the classification should be. So I started with, clearly psychedelics is a class. It's a class of drugs, fairly discrete. And that was pure and simple. Second class was stimulants, and the sort of drugs are obviously people have heard of are caffeine, cocaine, amphetamine, speed, methamphetamine. These are drugs that stimulate you, you're wired, you know, and increase energy. It can have a euphoric effect and other sort of secondary effects as well. But the primary, and this is how I've sort of tried to do it, the primary effects of all the drugs under stimulants is going to be that it's stimulating, energy enhancing, provides focus, which is the opposite of what the third classification is, which is anxiolytics and sedatives. So number 3 is sort of sedatives, downers. And you're thinking Xanax, diazepam,
Valium,
it is all, Valium, pregabalin, drugs that sort of relax. So they're the sort of polar opposite, if you like, to the second classification, which is stimulants. So we've got psychedelics, stimulants, anxiolytics. Now, they're the obvious ones. I mean, if you ask people to classify drugs, they probably end there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, no, it's not.
Those are the big ones.
It's not, because you've got dissociatives, which is the 4th class, and I didn't know. Having the 4th set is actually intoxicating depressants. I've called it intoxicating depressants because these are depressants that sort of sedate, but they're intoxicating as well. And alcohol is an intoxicating depressant. It intoxicates you, but ultimately it depresses your nervous system, central nervous system depressant, which makes you sort of relax and lose inhibitions. Called opioids are intoxicating depressants. They fall into that sort of category, as does, and in there you've got morphine and heroin and so on and so forth, tramadol. So you've got these depressants which are like intoxicating, and you get high because your sort of nervous system control, obviously CNS, is suppressed, and therefore you get high.
Could you say that some strains of marijuana are? Could you say some strains of marijuana are intoxicating? Some.
Marijuana, I'm going to come to at the end, because marijuana fits into quite a number of categories.
Yeah.
And I had a real difficulty. What do you do with marijuana? And I'll tell you what I did to it when I get to the end.
Okay.
That is like a vanilla, really, because it can be psychedelic. First time you have a heavy load of heavy talk of a strong cannabis strain when you've never had it before. Boy, you're going to fly.
That is. What did Terrence McKenna say? He was like, the real way to use marijuana, you see, is to not use it for 60 days, and then you eat 5 grams, not mushrooms, you eat 5 grams of marijuana in a brownie. That's how you use marijuana. You'll see God.
Yeah.
But you're right. You said the same thing about alcohol. I mean, you have one drink, you're a little uppity. You're a little, let's get going. It's, I believe Steve Ballmer, the co-founder of Microsoft, called it the Ballmer curve. They found when coders had one beer that their productivity and innovation, as well as dropping the number of errors they made. It's called the Balmer peak. If you have one beer, apparently your ability to code goes up exponentially. But if you go even like an ounce over it, it falls right back down. But so there's alcohol, weed, same thing. You have maybe like you maybe have like a light toke of sativa after a morning run. You're creative and you're up all day, but you rip some indica on a Friday night, you're about to sleep for 18 hours. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of what is the primary effect.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I've got these drugs have got to go under a class. They've got to be organised in a way that is rational, and in terms of what is the primary effect. So people will know, well, okay, well, I have this drug. What are the other drugs that are similar to this? And they'll know to go under sedatives if they've had Valium and they're looking for a different. Trying to locate a different sedative, well, they're going to find it under sedative, anxiolytics and sedatives. If they've had cocaine and they want a different, perhaps a weaker stimulant, they're going to find it under stimulants, which is number 2. So intoxicating depressants are all these sort of, they have an intoxication. Intoxication, it's an interesting word. I'm not sure what the strict dictionary definition is, but it's like a loss of sort of control, if you like, and then comes very much in the area of CNS depressants. So and like a loss of inhibition due to central nervous system being depressed and contained by the drug. So we've got 4 is intoxicating depressants. 5 is really interesting because I didn't even know this really existed when I first started. These are the dissociatives which I sort of read out a minute ago, because I'd heard of ketamine, but I'd heard of it in connection with it being a horse sedative, a means of sedating for operations. So I thought, well, it's a sedative, and this isn't really going to be very interesting. So I wasn't really that keen to try it or any of the other dissociatives that came across. I also thought it'd be quite boring. Well, as you were well aware, they're not like that at all. They're sort of a disconnect between mind and body, and they provide almost a sort of psychedelic type experience. And in there I've got ketamine, obviously, MXC, DXM, which is fairly widely used, ephenidine and so on and so forth, and nitrous oxide. That's a dissociative. So that's a class of drug, dissociatives, because they all have this disconnecting effect with reality, which is really weird.
I did nitrous oxide once by accident. I was just being a fat ass. I was eating ice cream out of the container, and I was squirting whipped cream in my mouth. And the whipped cream finished up, but I was trying to get the rest because I'm just a fat glutton. And I sucked on it as I was really trying to press down, and then I was just inhaling the air. Me, despite being a grown ass man, didn't realize that's what there was nitrous oxide in it. And for like 10 seconds.
The little canisters are actually.
Yeah, this was a big old thing of whipped cream. I'll try this at home, or if you want to have a good time, try it at home. Yeah, I inhaled after all the whipped cream was gone. I went. I brought it in.
There you go.
Yeah. That's the what most people use is a whip it. But I had never.
I only use it for cream, obviously.
Yeah, but I want
to be honest, I've had these sat here for about 5 years. I just can't bear to bring myself to throw them away.
It was 10 seconds of. I don't even really know how to describe it. It just kind of felt like it's not what I saw. It's like when I say everything kind of turned to static, like a TV or a radio turns to static. That isn't what I saw. That's what I felt. I felt like reality was going static. I just kind of, it's not like I was in a bubble and it popped. It was like I was in a bubble and then like 100 million holes formed on it and it started to just permeate. But it came on and was gone in probably the total course of 10 seconds.
That's why I found it deeply unfulfilling. It was a real disappointment, and
I didn't know what it was.
To it.
I Googled it. I was like, what the fuck is this? And I realized I had just done a whippet. And I was like, oh. And I was like, that wasn't fun. And two, man, that's a slippery slope. If it lasts for 10 seconds, you're going to do it again and again and again and again. And I was like,
it's over so quickly. And
yeah.
You know, I felt a sort of mental reset, if you like, but it was so minor and so fast. And, you know, if I'm going to have a drug for recreational purposes, I want it to last.
Give me an evening.
Yeah, I know some people take it with other drugs because it's supposed to have synergistic properties with certain drugs, and I'm not going to say what they are because I don't want to encourage people to do it. I'm not convinced it's really that good an idea, but yeah, there's a synergy with certain of the drug. But for me, it was a further disappointing exercise in terms of reward, given that I'd anticipated that it might be quite interesting, and it wasn't that interesting. But that's a dissociative, strictly speaking, so that sits next to ketamine and Mexi and some of the others in terms of effect. So notice I have done this in terms of effect all the way through, and I think that's the right way to do it. Number 6, empathogens and euphoriants. Now these were drugs that, you know, in terms of effect, feeling, drugs that make you feel love and oneness with people, yet also create a high, if you like, and a euphoric, semi-euphoric state. And these typically methadone, MDMA, which is ecstasy, MDA, methylone, 6-APD, which was a research chemical, was very, very popular in Europe at one point. So these are all classified together in number 6. Number 7, cannabinoids. Now, I've not put cannabis in here because what I've got under cannabinoids are all these chemicals that were created and synthesized to emulate cannabis, to be like cannabis, to be sold in markets like the UK and Europe and America until recent years, in which cannabis itself was illegal. So as we've discussed in previous episodes, you had the situation where some quite dangerous drugs were being manufactured and were on the market and being widely used simply because a benign plant drug like cannabis wasn't available legally. So I talk about public health and the dangers of prohibition. There's one right in the face of how people died because of prohibition directly. These chemicals would never have existed. So I've got a bunch of chemicals in there that I explored under cannabinoids because they're more like cannabis, so they're very difficult to place into another category. Number 8 is nootropics. Now, people think nootropics are what's the program. What they do is they're meant to enhance mental acuity and cognitive functionality. Limitless, that's the program I was thinking of. So it was a film, and you know, that's obviously they don't do that. To that, nothing like that. I mean, the sense of change is I mean, there's obviously a complete wide scope of opinion on this. I found very little. I found that the closest nootropic that I noticed having some sort of effect on my ability to focus and concentrate was a plant called the intellect tree. But the chemical nootropics, of which I experimented with 9 different ones,
pure sedum,
were relatively disappointing. But you know, to be fair to the nootropic people, you know, they are supposed to be used regularly, sort of daily, and that is just outside the scope of what I prefer to do with a drug that's not being used to get me better from something.
I went on a nootropic regimen in college for a couple of months. Tried a whole bunch of them: pure sedum, acetyl L-carnitine, lion's mane mushroom, and glutathione. I didn't notice shit, man. After about
they're very subtle. They're very subtle. To be fair, there's some, you know, phenibut.
Sure.
new pets. Yeah, definitely have an effect. I mean, yeah, but and Fenibut's used for all sorts of Russian drug.
Yeah.
And I think it was it's found because it was in the medical kit of cosmonauts.
Yeah.
So it was a mandatory item in the medical kit of cosmonauts. So, you know, these are definitely, some of them are definitely drugs. But you know, for the purpose, the primary purpose being nootropics, you know, I didn't really get a great deal from them. But that's a class of drug, and under the chemical side, there's 9 entries there now. Mapped across all these same categories map onto the botanicals as well. So under botanicals, I've got psychedelics again, I've got stimulants, I've got sedatives, I've got nootropics, but I've got 2 other ones for which there aren't. I didn't identify chemical equivalents. One is anerogens, which are dream herbs.
Say that again.
Dream herbs. These are plants and seeds.
What was the class?
Which create vivid or lucid dreaming.
What was the class of drugs you called them?
Anerogens. It could be anerogens, but I've never heard anyone say it. Somebody ever read it. Anerogens. ONEIROGENS. EIROGENS. And I'll give you the strict textbook definition of that. But I'll Google it for you. Anerogen, from the Greek meaning dream, is that which produces or enhances dream-like states of consciousness. This is characterized by immersive dream states similar to REM sleep, which can range from realistic to alien or abstract. So that's what anerogen means. Now, these are plants, some quite well-known ones. Callia, mugwort. There's some quite strange ones. Abulawu was a root I got from Africa. And what you were supposed to do, to get this one right, we're supposed to put it in a jar of water, mix it so that it's deep, I remember. And then I think I left that's the one I left overnight. Now you shake it and you get froth, and you spoon off the froth and eat the froth, and it's supposed to get lucid dreaming or vivid dreaming, and which are recallable dreams, or dreams that you can control. Now, some of these they have differing results. Certainly, there's an effect with some of them. Certainly, they're definitely not impotent at all. And people say, "Oh yeah, I had funny dreams after I had, I don't know, DMT or some or iboga or some other drug." But bear in mind, I'm looking at what the primary effect is here. Now, if you have a psychedelic, you're likely to get some pretty strange dreams, but the primary effect is a psychedelic effect. So that is where those psychedelics go. These drugs or psychoactives in this section are the ones whose primary effect is to create lucid or vivid dreaming. Number, I forgot what number on, whatever number it was. The next one is deliriums. Yeah, we've touched this before. These are a definite no-no for anybody who's listening to this. These are drugs like datura and nutmeg, which are plants, and they're sometimes confused with psychedelics. But they're not psychedelics. They induce a state which is dysphoric, and which is generally regarded in medicine as a state close to death. You get delirious. Now, being delirious is not where you want to be. It's not where I wanted to be. It's not where you want to be if you're seeking a recreational experience. So obviously, they are, by that account, they are certainly drugs that should be in a book on harm reduction like this. But they're deliriums. And the final section is unclassified. Now that's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it? And that's drugs that I haven't classified. And that's how I got round the cannabis quandary. because cannabis is a lot of things. It can be energizing, it can be relaxing, it can be psychedelic, and different people would have different views on where it would, what its primary effect would be, and its primary effect depends also on the dose and your how regularly you smoke or eat it. So it's not. I think it's a real sort of it's a unique drug in lots of ways, but I think it's for classification, it's a really difficult drug to handle. So I have this section of unclassified, and I also put in there kratom, and the reason kratom's in there is because that can energize or sedate, and it depends on the dose. So I'm like, well, should I put it under sedative? Should I put it under stimulants? And in the end, because it's like opioid qualities as well, really, even though I thought I'll stick that under unclassified. And I've done the same with tobacco, because again, stimulating and sedating.
Yeah,
and people will argue for both. So I've got 8 different plants or seeds in that category of unclassified, and I've got Mapacho in there, and I've got Kava, which seems to me to be like alcohol, but without the bad bits.
Yeah, I took Kava.
Yeah, I actually did like Kava.
Yeah,
I must admit. So that's how I've classified them, and I thought, and there's a picture I've got of how they overlap as well in the book, which I'll sort of try and I will show you, because it's a really good picture actually. I didn't draw it though, so I'm not going to claim.
Yeah, Kava is yeah, I used that for sleep once in college. It was nice. I liked it.
It's a drink that's Polynesia in Southeast Asia.
I got it as like capsules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's the sort of different categories overlapping. They've done it before, but because the reason they've done that is you've got the circles overlapping, because certain drugs can go in more than one category.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really neat picture to sort of identify things. But so I tried to follow that, broadly speaking, and I tried to organise it in terms of how people would view. If I want a stimulant, so they'd go to and they'd find them primary stimulants. I want to know about sedatives, so they'd go. So that's how I organised it, and I'm quite comfortable with the way that's turned out. But I thought really that would be a good thing to sort of go through in one of these talks, and it's only taken 27 minutes, so I can now do the other thing that I offered you at the start.
Right. Yeah, let's get on the other one. Yeah. It was what was the other one? The improper use of drugs?
No, this was, I sort of titled this, and I've scribbled a list down. And these are the mistakes people make when taking drugs, which can lead to tragedy or death.
That's a pretty broad.
But that's sort of where I came from. This is what I came up with before the book was even the embryo of an idea.
Okay.
I was looking at the drug forums and watching people disappear and die, and trying to work out what had they done wrong. And sometimes there was sufficient information to have a bit of an idea of what sort of mistake they'd made. And at the time, I was starting to write down, what the common mistakes actually were. What had they done that had caused them to die, or have some sort of tragic event, and what was the cause of it? And I started to list them, and so today I sort of grabbed my brains, because I'm not going to talk about that tonight. So I've written down 10 of the common mistakes that people make, and some of these you'll sort of think, wow, that's dead obvious, and they are. Some are less obvious than others.
Yeah.
Some you think, how could how could anybody possibly be so stupid? And I'm going to illustrate those with me doing them just to prove that, you know, I'm either completely stupid or anyone can make that mistake.
Anyone can do it, yeah.
Okay, we'll start with number one, and I'll read out the mistake, and then I will talk to it. So number one I've written down: disregarding or not establishing onset time, leading to double or multi-dosing. So this is the scenario in which you have a drug, and then you wait, and you wait a bit longer, and you think, oh God, it's a duff, or you think, oh, it's not strong at all. I'm going to have another two, or and you either don't know the onset time, or you don't believe the onset time, or you forget one simple fact is the onset time isn't a fixed time. It depends on a whole host of factors, and one of them is your own personal physiology. Another might be what are the contents of your stomach if it's an oral drug, and so on. So disregarding and not establishing onset time leading to double. People die because they're impatient and they gobble more drug without actually giving the initial dose time to take full effect. So it's a serious one, and I've got the drug I wrote next to that for me was LSD. Luckily, is a very benign. It's a psychedelic drug in terms of toxic content. And I was about 21, and I'd been wanting to try drugs. And LSD was a famous drug. Oh, I thought that's one where you have these great visuals and hallucinations. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
So
in the sky.
I got 2 tabs. I thought I'll get one and I'll get another just in case. So I bought them when I was away, and I got home with them, and I had one on a Sunday lunchtime, and I didn't have I mean, this is just naivety more than anything. And I waited about 20 minutes and nothing happened. And I was so impatient that I thought, nothing's happening. I'm going to have the other one. It's a duff. I knew there was something fishy about that guy.
He schemed me, gave me some sugar.
He's been ripped off. It's not. So I had the other one. And then about 10 seconds later, I suddenly realised, oh my God, actually I am starting to feel an effect. I feel really weird. And I'd sort of realised what I'd done at that point. So I ran into the kitchen to my partner, and that sort of, we didn't know. And I said, oh my God, so I confessed it all. I think what's going to happen to me? She was okay, fortunately, and that was luckily, two pieces. One, it was LSD. The second piece of luck is these must have been super low dose blotters, because looking back on it with all the experience now, I'd say in total I must have had about 40 micrograms.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
So it was hardly, it wasn't. I was affected. I mean, I was under some sort of influence, but it wasn't, a full on trip.
See the face of God and talk to our soul.
But that's a true story, and it's an illustration of, especially when you're young, you can be impulsive, impatient, and do something as stupid as I did, perhaps, with a drug less forgiving than LSD. So don't do that, Pick. Yeah. Don't do that.
Well, because LSD is rather forgiving, because you're right. I mean, it's going to be.
It is forgiving. Nobody's going to die.
Yeah. But the problem is that someone might take a Percocet and go, "Oh, it's not working yet. I'm going to take another Percocet."
Yeah, I mean,
you're taking shit that's going to drop your heart rate, right? So that's where the word.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of drugs that the last thing you want to do is double or triple dose or get yourself flying on a binge because of it. Plenty of drugs that could be a disaster, but LSD isn't really one of them, at least relatively speaking. Okay, number 2, mistakes people make that can lead to tragedy or death. Number 2 is eyeballing the dose instead of properly weighing it. And this is really easy to do, and it especially depends upon where you are and what your situation is when you're taking the dose. Because eyeballing the dose is, you really don't know what you're taking, and you can sort of get a dose, it looks like it's 100 milligrams. Well, really? And I'll tell you a story that this was one of my worst experiences. A story that happened to me. Didn't happen to me, I did it to me. And it was just sheer complacency. I bought a drug called Gogaine from a head shop, and Gogaine rhymes with cocaine, so you can guess it's a stimulant. And it was a research chemical. It was a mixture of, I think it was MPA and maybe MDAI and something else. It's recorded in the book, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And it's a powder. And I'd had it a couple of times before, 1 gram packets. And I wasn't a regular user. I mean, I wasn't having it, I'd have it every few weeks. And I'd take 100 milligrams perhaps, or I'd snort it, and not eat it. I'd eat it. I was eating it at 200 milligrams, I can't remember. And I'd just feel energized, and it was okay, interesting. And that was that. On this occasion, I bought a 3 gram packet because it was on special offer. So I brought my 3 gram packet home with me, and when I opened it, I said, "Oh, I'll have some Gogaine." It was actually a Christmas morning. Okay. But I'm really tired. I went out last night, and I keeps trying to put this back as though I was some sort of kid, but I wasn't. Trying to excuse it. And I was really tired. And well, I'll tell you what, I'll have some of this Gogaine just to keep me going and to pep me up for the day. And I was busy. I didn't have time to, stupidity. So I just poured a bit out of it, and then sort of got it in a little thing and poured it down and swallowed it. And I don't know how much it was, but I know what I did. The dose size was relative to the bigger packet. So the normal size, 100 milligram, 200, whatever it was, relative to the small packet would look like this much, but I had a much bigger packet. So the ratio to the dose was much bigger. It's 3 or 4 times bigger than I normally take. Okay. So this large dose went down my neck, and of course it did the trick immediately. So much so that an hour or 2 later, I came back for some more and took a second dose. I thought, well, that was really good. And not realising that I was actually having something like 3 or 4 times what I normally would have. And before I knew it, the packet had gone. So I had 3 grams of this stuff. And I was pretty wired and okay. But later on in the day, I started realising that I want to go to sleep, but I can't. I'm really tired, but I'm stimmed up so much that there's not a chance in hell I've been getting to sleep. And it's a horrible feeling, like you're being torn. You know you've had enough. You know you want your brain to stop, but it's not going to stop for you. So I had this night where I was not really sleeping and tossing and turning. And the next day I got up and I hadn't slept, and I was still, so wired in terms of listless, really tired, but not being able to do anything about it. And it got to night again, and the night was when the drama really started, because it was dark and everything became threatening. I could hear noises outside, which I sort of imagined were, threatening, or someone coming to get me. And I kept seeing things and people out the corner of my eye who were known as the phenomenon known as the shadow people. Yeah, So I was in a state of almost in psychosis.
Light psychosis, yeah.
Yeah, so I was edging towards psychosis, and it was horrible. And it sounds, when you talk about the shadow people, it can sound quite cool, but it's not. It's terrifying, and it's horrible, and it's frightening, and there's absolutely no redeeming part to it whatsoever. And that experience was, I could have easily had a psychotic episode. Yeah, I could have died. you know, and that is eyeballing. You know, that was because I eyeballed the dose, and weighing it instead of eyeballing it isn't only about getting the appropriate dose. It's also a sort of checkpoint for you as an individual to think, okay, I'm stopping now to wait. And while you're measuring the dose and fiddling around with it, you've got thinking time. Do I really want this? So it's like a checkpoint between, you know, to help you stop binging if you don't want to binge.
Yeah.
So, you know, always weigh your dose, because eyeballing the dose, you know, isn't really a good thing to be doing. It's a terrible risk.
Yeah.
And weighing a dose may be a pain in the arse, but it may save your life at the same time.
Yeah.
Number 3 of mistakes people make that can lead with drugs that can lead to tragedy or death. Taking the same dose as companions who may be regular users and have a huge tolerance. Now the scenario here is quite obvious, I guess. Young lad, always wanted to try heroin.
Yeah.
Only knows one guy who does heroin, so he decides to hook on to his friend who does heroin. He goes out with him and his mates. So they end up somewhere and they start taking the heroin. Our guy doesn't have a clue about doses or anything like that, so he thinks I'll be okay. I'll just take what they're doing. So he takes the same dose as all the chaps in the circle, and he dies. Yeah. Why does he die? Because they're addicts. They've all got huge tolerance, and he's got no tolerance whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that's taking the same dose of companions who may be regular users. Don't determine the dose based upon what anyone else is taking. Research the dose for yourself. Have I got an example? Yeah, I have. The Pacho. This is the one I've mentioned before, where there was people on the streets of Hanoi in Vietnam talking out of pipes, and I thought I could just go and sit down and have what they're having. And because I know an idea is Mapacho, which is sort of strong tobacco, 20 times the strength of regular tobacco. So I'll sit down and I just have a smoke of this bamboo pipe, and of course I nearly pass out. It's I feel sick and ill. I feel like I've sucked the fumes of an exhaust pipe. It's a sort of chemical poisoning type feeling. And I'm dizzy and I'm nearly collapsing and I'm gasping for breath. And that really is the same as the heroin guy. It's just basically taking the dose and determining your dose based upon what other people are doing without sufficient knowledge of their situation. So don't do that. Just establish the dose for yourself with all the relevant factors. Don't just take what somebody else is doing, because you could easily end up dead. Number 4. This is short and sweet. Combining 2 or more drugs without researching the risks of the specific combination. I'm not really one of these people who likes to have combine 2 drugs and have 2 drugs, MDMA and LSD or speed, and
I like
which because I've got a better handle on what's going to happen, and everything's been tried, tested, documented, and I know where I'm going really. But people do, and they actually pay the price for it. And there's something called an MAOI, which can be a drug. That's right, and that can enhance the strength of lots and lots of drugs. So if you're combining a drug with an MAOI, really, do you know what you're doing? You can. I mean, you have to for ayahuasca,
you have,
and you have to for certain other similar experiences. But generally speaking, you really shouldn't be doing this stuff unless you know what you're doing. TripSit have a wonderful combination chart of what are the risky combinations and what are the synergies and so on, which is definitely worth seeking out. So that was combining 2 or more drugs without researching the risks of the specific combination. Don't do that. If you're going to do it, know what you're doing. Number 5, failing to test a drug when unsure of its identity or purity. this gets a lot of people. They take a drug and they're not sure what it is, and it's a different drug to what they're expecting, and maybe they'll take the dose of the drug they're expecting and they'll die. Lots of scenarios which end up in death through not testing the drug. Now, when I started taking drugs, I didn't think I could test the drug, and I would always send it off to a lab, which luckily in this country there's a free testing service, anonymous, which you can send drugs to, and I'd always do that. And one of the reasons I'd do that was because I didn't think I could test it myself. I thought I've never done chemistry, and I'm not a chemist.
Yeah.
How can I test a drug? Well, it was only when I bought a testing kit for a few dollars, a few pound or something, that I realised that actually I can test it. It's so easy to do. And if you want a more comprehensive test, even that's easy. I put the instructions of how to do it in there because I realised when I discovered it was easy that maybe I hadn't been testing some drugs because I thought I couldn't test them, and I wouldn't want others to be in the same situation. So I decided I'll show you how to test them in the book. But they are straightforward to test. And I think it's really important, if you've any doubts about the identity of a drug that you intend to take, you actually do go and find a way of testing it, or you test it yourself. I've got an example, and it wasn't the result of a will not to test. It was just complacency and a mix-up. I got these two drugs, pregabalin and gabapentin.
Mm-hmm.
They're similar, same family, and they're sort of like sedative type drugs. And I had one of the drugs, and it was really disappointing. And I thought it was pregabalin, which I'd had. So I thought, well, that's quite weak, and the other drug was supposed to be weaker than it, gabapentin. So I had the gabapentin at a higher dose, and of course, the effects were disastrous. I couldn't stay sat here. I type in and typing. I mean, I wasn't here, but I couldn't type on the keyboard. So I ended up in bed. I was ill. I couldn't walk straight. And sometimes it can be fun, if dissociative, it can be an enjoyable experience, but it wasn't that. It was a really horrible type feeling, and that I was really worried that I might not survive it, because I didn't know that much about it, and what I'd done is I'd through complacency I'd failed to identify the drugs properly. So when I came back the day after, and I thought, oh God, I'd actually got them the wrong way around. Because I had the packet there of the pregabalin, which I thought was gabapentin, and I realised it wasn't. So therefore, that last trip that I've just documented was the gabapentin, and this one was the pregabalin, which is stronger than gabapentin, and this is why I've basically overdosed on this thing, and it was complacency, and it was basically failure to test in a way, failure to identify the drug properly and sensibly, and I mean, I think it was probably lucky in some respects, but I was saying that you can only be in this game. You can only be unlucky once.
Yeah.
And the lights go out.
Yeah, there's no.
If you're unlucky once, it can be the last time, the first time and the last time. Yeah. So maybe I was a bit lucky to get away with that one, but it was a stupid mistake to make, and I should, this isn't that long ago, so it's almost embarrassing to actually admit to it.
I don't think there's anything embarrassing. I mean, you have to own it, man. I mean, I would say within the last couple of years, I've had some of the worst experiences in my life, dangerous experiences. I just turned 30, man. You just gotta own it. I mean, yeah, you can be embarrassed. Sure, there's nothing wrong with embarrassment, But yeah, it's like, I think you said it importantly earlier. You said, this happened to me, and then you paused and you said, no, I did this to me. That's the important thing is, yes, be educated, acknowledge it, don't make the mistake again, but also acknowledge, I did this to me. No one did this to me. No one, they didn't grab me, throw me in a van, and hit me with a syringe. It's, I did this. It's,
yeah, I think the important thing is that I was able to document it and hopefully stop others doing the same, making the same mistake.
That's what's so important about what you're doing is because for every person that says, it's almost, think about like UFO sightings, right? There's a tangible thing. The military officials say that there are real radar returns. These are objects in the sky. But for every one of them that says it, there's 9,999 that had one and don't say it. And because of that, it has a negative effect on the whole field. So for every person like you that openly talks about an experience saying, I got lucky, and most people don't get lucky, there are a lot of people out there who also got lucky, but just never bring it up again. But because of that, now there are going to be people who are unlucky. It's important to talk about it because it'll educate other people. Does that make sense? I'm kind of.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the whole. I mean, I knew when I started the book that I made mistakes, and that the mistakes would have value to other people. And I just hope they do. Yeah. Number 6, and another mistake. Using masks under the influence, under the weather or ill, thus adding to the prevailing physical strain. I mean, one of the 10 commandments in the book is, if you're not feeling well, don't have the drug. Yeah. Make sure you're in a good mental and physical state before you actually have a drug, because you could well compound the problem and put your body under immense strain. And I did this with codeine. I had sort of a flu type thing, and I was feeling pretty rough. And I sort of had this idea, and it wasn't the brightest idea in the world. But, well, I've got to do codeine for the book. And I wasn't looking forward to codeine because it was just another opioid. And I don't enjoy the opioids much. So I did the opioid only because people use the opioids and I had to do them. So I thought, here's an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I have to do opioid for the book, and I'll use codeine because it's used for colds and pain relief and flu and various ailments. So I thought, so I don't know, I'll do that. So, and I'll feel better. Yeah. And I'll also be able to test it for the book. So I'll have to do it on some other occasion. And I had a recreational dose, I had 100 milligrams, which is quite a lot. And it didn't really work. It had the opposite effect. Yeah. For a while, I felt sort of semi-euphoric, but I could feel it was masking the illness rather than replacing it. Yeah. So it wasn't a sort of merry high. Yeah. It was a miserable, dismal high, if you like. Yeah. So I wasn't having a great time. And was it relieving the pain? I'm not sure it was, because after what was a relatively short period of time, I ended up feeling so ill. I went to bed and lay in the bed with a headache. And people don't generally understand that opioids give you a hangover, like alcohol does, when you stop having them. And I think before too long, I was starting to have this definitely the morning after. I still had the illness, and it was compounded by this terrible, terrible hangover. Yeah. So it never overcame the illness, and somehow during the evening, and somehow it found a synergy with the illness to sort of make me miserable and not capable of doing anything. And then during the night, when I kept waking up with hot sweats and not feeling quite ill, and then in the morning, I had this sort of illness and the hangover, and I had a really rough time. And yes, I will have put my body under significant strain during that exercise through not adhering to my own words. If you're not feeling okay, don't take drugs, because you're putting your body under additional stress. And I certainly did that on that occasion with the codeine. So Yeah, another one I should have known better, but there you go. Number 7, rolling again without having properly recovered or detoxed from the last session. This is easy. If you have drugs every night, this is you're obviously doing this regularly. You're not giving your body time to detox. You maybe the next evening you're having a different drug at a high dose, and you've still got the old drug in your system. You know, the half-life hasn't expired, and for the reasons I've just mentioned, it's putting you under stresses and strains. Maybe the drugs aren't compatible. If you're having a good heavy night on MDMA, really you're not going to get the same out of the second night, or if you do, you're having a higher dose. It's just a really risky path to take. So, you know, that was one of the 10 commandments again, like give your body time, let it get out your system before you roll again. You know, I think the recommended wait time for MDMA is actually 6 weeks. I think that it's on all the all the forums that you're supposed to wait. So, you know, if you're repeating, you know, having a second night, or if you're having another strong drug, or cocaine or speed or something, you know, you're taking, you know, chances there that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't take them, and I would strongly recommend that you don't. Number 8, very simple, not allergy testing a drug on that. This is number 8 of mistakes people make that lead to tragedy or death when using drugs. Not allergy testing a drug on the first occasion it's used. You know, it's rare. It's rare that somebody's allergic to a particular drug, very rare, but it happens. You know, it happens. And, you know, I've read a number of times where, you know, people have died in open air concerts and at music festivals where they've actually had an allergy to a particular drug. So, and it's only a few seconds to test it on your tongue, any discomfort, and, you know, just go through the motions of just checking it, just to be sure. And it goes hand in hand with you can always take more but you can't take less than you've already taken. But yeah, an allergy test is a pain, but it's a pain worth enduring. Oh dear, number 9. Number 9 of the mistakes people make using drugs which lead to tragedy or death. Falling into an endless redosing binge without having limited the stash. I've told you this one before about my experience with methamphetamine. I bought 100 milligrams, and it was fantastic. And I was taking 10 milligram lines. Yeah. And I was sort of becoming obsessively, compulsively redosing. Oh God, more! I can't get enough of this stuff. Give me more, give me more. Oh, and it was such great. You know, after I've used it all up, you know, I'm in a situation where, oh no,
I'm out of the good times. Yeah. It's a danger.
Now, had I got more available, I would have carried on, and God knows what would have happened, because even with this one experience, which, you know, it's pretty decent dose, but, you know, people get through grams of this stuff. Even from this, the next day I was so down and sort of really devoid of energy and devoid of will and depressed. And this went on for ages, just from this one experience. And you know, so, you know, the lesson there is decide what your maximum is for a session, and make sure you don't have access to any more.
Yeah.
Because once you fall into a binge, a redosing binge, you've lost objectivity, and your judgment is going to be flawed.
Yeah.
Mine was, you know, and I'm an old man. You know, a young kid is going to, presumably in most cases anyway, have less willpower, so yeah. Falling into an endless redosing binge without having limited the stash. You know, it's a slippery slope, that, and it's incredibly easy with certain drugs to just binge and binge and binge and binge. And lastly, number 10 of the mistakes people made, which lead to tragedy or death. Not researching the drug's effect or not establishing a suitable setting. This applies to a lot of drugs, not just psychedelics, in which you take a drug in circumstances which are totally inappropriate for that drug.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example I may have given you with the salvia divinorum and the young lad who was in a head shop in front of me. He was he'd been drinking and his mates was outside hiding around the corner. And his story was, "I want to have a blast," those are his words. And the shopkeeper couldn't recommend, because he was selling all these legal highs, not for human consumption. That's how he was legally selling the drugs.
Yeah.
That's how it worked in this country.
Yeah, same here.
So the guy was there, and he picked up this salvia divinorum, which, as you well know, sends you to La La Land in a dysphoric place very, very quickly. You really don't know where you are. And immediately I saw the potential for an absolute disaster here, which was take the salvia out to the street with his 3 mates, smoke it, one talk, and they're in the middle of Manchester city centre by a busy road, completely out of the tree and not conscious of where they are at all. And bang, so that's what I saw. So I told this lad that, look, this is what could happen with that. You don't want that. I said, no, but I'm going to have a blast. So I managed to edge him over to this stimulant, which, by the way, with alcohol is a terrible idea too, but it's less of a terrible idea than standing on a road having salvia divinorum.
Yeah.
So it was a case of the worst of two evils.
Yeah.
So I managed to edge him towards this safer option, and he went out. And unfortunately, 2 minutes later, he came back because his mates liked the idea of being jettisoned off into space and not knowing what they were doing. So he swapped it for the salvia and cleared off again. So you can't win them all, unfortunately. Nope. But yeah, that's an example of not understanding the drug's effects and not taking them in the right setting, in the right circumstances. It can have an absolutely disastrous effect if you're not careful. So, and that's an example of it. And people do fall foul of that, unfortunately. But that's number 10 of mistakes people make that lead to tragedy or death: not researching the drug's effects or not establishing a suitable setting. There were 10 that I found on forums, or I thought I found on forums, because very rarely people will come back and say, "Oh, John's died of a heroin overdose because he went out with his mates, and they had you very rarely got the full story back. But it was quite often just reading through the posts and what they were up to, the previous posts, possible to work out broadly what they're likely to have done. And from that, I worked out a list of some of the most common ways that people manage to have a problem and unfortunately die. And that was, so these were before the embryo of the idea of the book came to mind. And these were sort of the preliminary building blocks for the 10 Commandments of Safer Drug Use, which is in the first section.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
I enjoyed it. I was thinking, I know we got to wrap this up, but I was thinking you need to become like a president or a billionaire or something, because you always hear that power is an aphrodisiac or power is intoxicating. You need to become a world leader so you can write in power in your book as a drug.
Power as a drug.
Well,
you can feel it.
You'll hear like power is intoxicating. Like you've heard that.
Yeah. Well, is it?
Well, I was thinking you need to become the president or the prime minister just so you can put an entry in your book. Power.
Whether it works or not.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of non-drug scenarios in there. I've got sensory deprivation.
Yeah.
Because if you're going in a tank, you're not supposed to evoke hallucinatory states. And I have Sharadora, which is an Indian thing where they pour hot oil on your head.
Okay.
And that worked. I had this sort of psychedelic flashes because
Okay.
it stimulated the pineal gland, I guess.
Okay.
So I've got a few non-drug highs, well, two.
Yeah.
I've got two non-drug highs in there that I sort of found out about on the journey. Power's not one of them,
You should.
unfortunately. Because if I had the power, I'd change a lot of things about this world.
Yeah. Wouldn't we all? When are you
For the
gonna
better.
When are you gonna be on the Joe Rogan Experience, man? You would be an amazing episode.
Well, all that matters is whether he thinks that. And I mean, the problem with these people is how do you get past Joe Rogan's people to speak to Joe Rogan? How do you get past Russell Brand's people to speak to Russell Brand? You know, that's the problem. So they never actually get to.
That's by design. When you get that much money,
they have people around them to protect people from people like me.
Crazy people like us, like, hey, let us on your show. Like, they set up.
Yeah, I'd like to go on some of these programs just because it provide an opportunity to spread the harm reduction gospel, if you like, and save lives. But when I sort of looked at, okay, I'll I sort of realised that. You can't actually make direct contact, and it's somebody else who decides what they get to see, and there's this walls around all these famous people, which are almost impregnable, possible to get around.
I think you just need to claw up. You just need to do bigger and bigger podcasts, or do more podcasts, more people, because eventually enough people will hear of you that you'll get on there. I think you will. I think you gotta. My friend Josh is an ex-Marine, and but he's done acid several times and said it changed his life. Said it saved his life, and he just started a podcast. It's brand new. He's only 2 episodes in, but I bet he would like to have you on. He loves that stuff.
Well, give him a shout. Tell him I exist.
Yeah,
I mean that's the problem. People don't know I exist, really.
Well, exactly. You just gotta keep doing episodes.
And then maybe they'll look at me and they realize, sort of think I'm an idiot and decide not to have me. But it's do they know I'm existing? And I'm probably not.
Hey,
just have to be lucky, I guess.
You do. I always tell people this. People ask, how do I get cool guests on here? Like you. Yesterday I had on Sebastian Gallegos. He's another United States Marine veteran who lost his arm in Iraq, and he's got a prosthetic, a robotic arm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's badass. People always ask me, how do I get cool guests? They only see the episodes that I do. For every person that says they'll do the podcast, this is not exaggerating. I'd say there's upwards of 99 that say they won't do it. So you just gotta email, you gotta call, Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, just constantly be asking. The vast majority are gonna say no and stop contacting me. Every once in a while, you'll get one that will go, fuck it, sure, I'll do it.
Yeah,
you just gotta go out. You gotta go out. Hey man, there's never been a new or unique idea under the sun that isn't met with overwhelming disapproval and criticism. That's everything starts that way. The wheel to the automobile to the plane to the radio, things that we now take as staples of our lives. Whenever those things started, people are like, "You fucking idiot! No one's gonna do this." So you just gotta just buckle down and keep going forward. I think you can do it, man. I think you could be on a ton of podcasts, and I'll send your stuff to my friend Josh.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I know harm reduction is important. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
It's incredibly important.
It's the way to save lives and lots and lots of lives. It's just not given a fair crack by the mainstream. It's buried. People just see the word drugs and they're media people, and that we're not going to touch that. And they don't get it. And hopefully, if I can actually, that's why I do this stuff. I can actually change some minds there. And make more of the media understand that harm reduction is so important, and they've got control and power, which we just talked about, to actually do something about this and save people. Maybe it'll make a difference. Let's hope so.
I think it will. Dominic Milton-Trott, author of The Drug User's Bible. I will link it in the description in the top comment. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for coming on.
Okay.
Until next
Thank
time.
you.
Until next time.
Namaste.
Yeah. I'll see you, Dominic.
Okay.